afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon. Good afternoon and welcome to the City Club of Portland. I'm Paddy Tillett, the president. No sound. Good afternoon. I'm Paddy Tillett, president of the City Club. Happy New Year to you all and welcome to the first of the State of City Club Friday Forums. Today we begin with an economic forecast from three distinguished panelists, from John Mitchell, who will talk about the national scene, Tom Potiowsky, who will talk about the state's economy, and John Cortright, who will talk about the economy of the city of Portland. But first, some announcements. Join us next Friday, January the 18th, for a preview of the issues facing the Oregon legislature as they plan to meet in special session next month. Senate President Gene Derfler and State Minority Leader Kate Brown will share their perspectives of the billion-dollar task before them, and we hope will hint at some possible solutions. A couple of months ago, at the instigation of our Young Members Task Force, we began to encourage the wearing of name tags at Friday forums, and you'll find the blank tags at the table. Please make use of these during the program. This is your opportunity to meet and get to know other people and to remind old acquaintances who the heck you are. If you have questions about the club, ask board and staff members who are wearing these plastic name tags. Our board host at the far end of the top table here is Carol Wetherill, who is a member of the Board of Governors and Professor of Education at Lewis and Clark College. She'll have the privilege of asking the first question of our speakers. Following Carol's question, we'll open the program to questions from City Club members in the audience. Please be ready at the microphone ahead of time so that we can take full advantage of our speakers' time. Begin by identifying yourself as a member of the City Club and remember to ask your question in 30 seconds or less, please. Broadcast of City Club programs this quarter is made possible in part by corporate underwriting from Weyerhaeuser, from Enterprise Rent-A-Car, and from Pacific Care, and we're very grateful for their support. It was heartening to read of an accord amongst G10 representatives in Switzerland earlier this week on the probable early recovery of their respective national economies. John Mitchell will open our panel presentation today with some encouraging comments on our national economy, though not, I suspect, without sounding some cautionary notes. Mr. Mitchell is US Bancorp's economist for the Western region and principal at M&H Economic Consultants. His career includes 13 years as professor of economics at Boise State University and 15 years as US Bancorp's chief economist. He received a BA at Williams College and his master's and PhD from the University of Oregon. He has chaired the Oregon Council of Economic Advisors and the Governor's Technical Advisory Committee on Tax Review. Mr. Mitchell somehow finds time to write a bi-monthly economic update for US Bank. Tom Potiowsky is state economist for Oregon. He will reflect on the first real recession that the state has experienced in 20 years before sharing with us what he thinks lies ahead. Mr. Potiowsky was professor and chair of the economics department at PSU until the governor plucked him out to serve as state economist. In his present role with the Office of Economic Analysis, he's responsible for quarterly forecasts on state demographics, the economy, and curiously, the expected number of incarcerated felons during the next biennium. After earning a BA in economics at the University of Ohio, he went on to receive his PhD at the University of Colorado. As an academic, Mr. Potiowsky is widely known for his published work on macroeconomics and forecasting. In the real world, he has consulted widely, both here and abroad. He's been an active member of the American Economics Association, the Western Economics Association, the National Association of Business Economics, and the Governor's Council of Economic Advisors, all of which leaves him insufficient time, I gather, for either golf or whitewater kayaking. Joe Cortright is principal of the Portland-based economics consultancy Impresa, which operates chiefly at the local and state levels. He's author of Workforce Myth and Realities, The Economic Importance of Being Different, The Ecology of Silicon Forest, and his latest work, The High-Tech Specialization, was recently published by the Brookings Institute. He's currently engaged on comparative study of the information industries in Europe and the US, amongst other things. Mr. Cortright is a graduate of Lewis and Clark College and holds a master's degree in public policy from the University of California. For more than a dozen years, he's served as executive officer for the Joint Legislative Committee on Trade and Development, which is the state legislature's policymaking arm on economic issues. So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome this distinguished panel and harry them with really tough questions. Thank you.
Thank you. The century opened with growth estimates trimmed, weak investment, fewer jobs, and portfolios that slimmed. St. Al responded with rate cuts galore. The futures market expect no more. Fiscal policy with tax cuts shifted late in the spring, a decade of rate cuts and checks that took wing. The hope for rebound was dashed in September, in a horrible day that we will long remember. No airplanes, closed malls, the new spirit in this nation. Disengagement and delay to comprehend the situation. No growth in the third, down again in the last. The weakness was broad with bad news coming fast. More rate cuts, less inventory, and things that wear out. Lower debt loads in time will turn this about. There have been 32 cycles since 1854, and we can be very confident there will be some more. '02's economy will improve as it ages. The upturn will emerge in uneven stages. Early positive straws will into data transform at a pace that is trying where fast growth's been the norm. Unknowns abound as we enter this new year. From Khyber to the post office, we have new things to fear. The resilience of the nation and our freedom, its core, mean that this cycle shall pass before we meet once more. I'll spend the rest of my time elaborating on that. The U.S. economy began to slow down in the middle of 2000. If you look at the revised data, it's a cycle that's different than a lot of the other cycles that many of us in the room remember. We began to see a significant decline in business spending on equipment, which had been rising at double-digit rates in the latter part of the 1990s. Some of that associated with Y2K, putting in the infrastructure for the internet, lots of excitement about the new technology, but the bottom line was rapid growth in business investment. Some disappointments, completion of projects, increasingly marginal projects, resulted in declines in business investment that began in the fourth quarter of 2000 and continue to this point. We also saw an equity collapse. Significant declines in stock prices after years of very rapid increases. I'll give you an example from the Federal Reserve. Net worth of private households and nonprofits rose by about $5 trillion in 1999. Dropped a bit by about $526 billion in 2000, and then declined, for example, by $2 trillion in the third quarter of 2001. So the wealth effect shifted into reverse. We also had sort of a reassertion or events that forced us to remember that the business cycle is not dead. There are patterns of behavior and investment and taking on debt and that sort of thing that give rise to cycles, and those things are still there. It is almost plausible to think that they're not there after you have an incredibly long expansion, which we went through, 10 years, from the spring of 1991 to the spring of 2001. On top of this economy, which was growing slowly, we had, of course, the events of September 11th. We will never know whether or not we would have had a technical recession in the absence of those events, but we certainly have one now. The National Bureau of Economic Research has made the call that the recession started in March. In response to this slowing, and again, long before September, we started to see a response of policymakers. The Federal Reserve, starting on the 3rd of January 2001, began a series of 11 interest rate cuts. Federal funds rate dropped from 6.5% down to 1.75%, the lowest in about 40 years. So monetary policy shifted dramatically in a relatively short period of time. We also saw a change in fiscal policy. It was not originally conceived of as a short-term stimulus package, but the tax cuts that were proposed during the campaign passed in the spring, and you saw lower marginal rates that will be phased in over a 10-year time period, as well as the checks go out in July. An interesting example of fiscal policy that actually shifted in an expansionary direction at the time that we were in recession. And then, of course, in the wake of September 11th, the accompanying increase in defense expenditures, other kinds of spending, New York rebuilds, that sort of thing. So fiscal policy has become more expansionary. The basic task now is sort of waiting for the turn. Okay, I mean, that's what economists do all day now, is sit around, tear through the entrails, trying to figure out when the thing is going to turn. Okay. The things that are going to turn the economy, we know what they are. Okay, we've seen them in other cycles. It's the inventory liquidation process. And inventory liquidation subtracted 0.8% from the growth rate that we saw in the third quarter of this year when the economy was declining at an annual rate of 1.3%. The refinancing activity, which has taken place in record levels, people adjusting their debt loads, businesses as well. Absorption of excess capacity, it takes time. Okay, we got relatively low levels of capacity utilization. Lots of stuff have come on stream after the economy slowed. That will be absorbed in time. Things wear out and have to be replaced. That's part of the cycle. New things are invented that become sort of new things for people to buy. And those are all part and parcel of the process of a rebound in economic activity. There are glimmers at the moment that things are changing. I mean, if you look at the data, you can start to see things suggestive of us approaching a bottom. I mean, leading indicators have risen for the last 2 months. Consumer confidence has risen for the last 3 months. The Institute of Supply Management, formerly the National Association of Purchasing Managers, their survey, which has been below 50 for 17 months, has now risen to 48.2, 50 being the all-important level. And the new orders and production indexes have moved up above 50. If you look at the labor market, the aggregate of the hours worked seemed to stabilize in the last month. All of those things would suggest that we are approaching a bottom. But I don't think that it is over yet. Employment continues to decrease. The coincident indicators continue to fall. It's a very close call, but I suspect the Fed is probably done for this cycle. They meet again, of course, later this month, and it's a close call. We know they almost have to be done because we're getting close to zero. But the federal funds rate is 1.75%. I suspect they'll probably hold there, maybe one more. But that policy is already done. Inflation, leading indicators, down. Year over year, we're talking 1.9%, so that's not a major constraint in the short term on Federal Reserve behavior. I suspect that the economy will bottom out in the first half of the year, and it'll become generally apparent that we have growth in the second half of the year, and people, I think, will be more comfortable with the notion that the recession is over. But, okay, I believe there are going to be some different aspects to the upturn. Okay. In other cycles, you've seen housing come roaring back. That isn't going to happen. It can't, because it didn't go down. Not very much anyway. So it can't come screaming back. All those automobile sales that we saw in the fourth quarter of last year, some of that was undoubtedly borrowed from the first part of this year. So you're not likely to see the same kind of performance in the automobile sector. Consumer debt loads, the debt service burden has started to decline, but it's only declined for 1 quarter. Okay. So I think that's got a ways to run, which may make for some more subdued rebounds in consumer spending. But for 2002, I suspect we'll see GDP growth in the 1 to 1.5% range, with weakness in the first part of the year, strength in the second half of the year, a rate of inflation coming in close to 2%. But we're not going to come back the same place. Okay? There's going to be some differences. The events of September 11 mean that more resources are going to go into the defense sector. We're likely to see some hits from a productivity standpoint as resources, again, go into the provision of security. I mean, I can't help but thinking about productivity when I go to the airport. Okay, and go through that whole process. There's fewer people flying, fewer flights, and a lot more people doing things out there. Plus the side issue with what does repeated X-raying do to my shoes. But anyway, another aspect is it's not clear how consumers are going to change behavior. You look at the confidence survey and it says they still want to take vacations, but the modal shift may be changing. More to cars, less to airplanes. I mean, those kinds of things are out there. Locational preferences. It's going to be interesting to watch for as we move into this upturn. In summation, I think we have to remember the business cycle is not dead, and another generation is getting that lesson. Thank you for your attention.
Well, I just want to start by pointing out that we have many ways that we take a look at the Oregon economy in the Office of Economic Analysis. And besides our databases and computer models that we use, I also assess the local economy by using what I call my fast food economic indicator. Now, the measurement process works something like this. I drive up to a takeout window and I order a burger, fries, and a shake. It comes to around $3.45. I turn over about $7.68. Now, if the window attendant has no clue what to do with this amount of money, has to call the manager or becomes agitated or surly to me because of what I did, I figure the local economy is in pretty good shape, right? Because this person shouldn't have this job. Right? Labor markets must be tight enough that the manager has to accept any warm body that fills out an application. So today, what does my fast food economic indicator tell me? Well, the window attendants are giving the correct change with a smile today. Other indications, my morning newspaper lands on my doorstep rather than under my neighbor's car. I've had very informative salespeople help me during this holiday shopping season. A financial analyst noted that when choosing to follow a stockbroker, we no longer have to confuse a bull market for brilliance. And Bill Connerly, a well-known economist in the Pacific Northwest, has pointed out, the drop in advertising has forced the news media to fill the open space with real news stories. But really, what does the recession really look like? Recessions are, by the way, equal opportunity unemployers. They cut across all sectors of the economy. Business incomes are down and workers are laid off. Oregon's unemployment rate hit 7.4% in November, the highest in the nation, climbing up from 4.4% only a year ago. Just today, this morning, in fact, the December unemployment rate was released by the Oregon Economic Employment Department, and it inched up only to 7.5%. And I'm sure, based on what the other states are doing, it still has to be one of the highest in the nation. The state has shed over 36,000 jobs since last December. It's had the highest claims for unemployment insurance and demands for social programs that we've seen in the last almost 20 years. This recession that we're in right now originated in the manufacturing sector. And Oregon is relatively more dependent on its manufacturing sector than is true for most other states. We diversified our manufacturing base, trying to go from a natural resource-based economy to one more diversified. But in that process, as we diversified our manufacturing base, we became a more manufacturing-based economy. It's just that we make a lot more different things than we did before, but manufacturing is more important to the Oregon economy. That provided us with great growth in the 1990s, but that's now what's pulling us down further. So when you have this type of based economy, you can have great riches when that's the part of the economy that's growing tremendously. And we were, if not number one in many sectors in terms of growth in the 1990s throughout the nation, we now have dropped to almost the last place of any state in terms of growth. Heavy job losses have been reported in high tech, lumber and wood, transportation, metals, construction, wholesale and retail trade, and the non-health services. Coupled with our domestic downturn, we also have a global economy that's also slowing. That has had adverse impacts on Oregon exports, which have fallen over 20% in the past year that ended in the last third quarter. Also, this has created for our state budget a hole of the magnitude of somewhere on the order of $830 million. This is the first recession that we've had to go through in this state that is post-Measure 5, where the state must take up the slack of funding for schools. And also it's post-Measure 11, where we've seen rising prison populations. And as Patty mentioned, our office is responsible for trying to see what is going to be that prison population in the state. And also, given this kind of scenario, it's impossible to leave our schools, the public safety and social services in the state harmless in this situation when they constitute about 90% of the total budget. You just can't not touch them and able to close that hole. But one thing we think about this, just as consumers and businesses have slowed their spending, thus lowering business sales, causing losses of incomes, and we've seen the job layoffs, the state, in essence, has also lost sales. When businesses and households lose income, the state loses tax revenues. It's as if customers were buying less goods and services from the state. The state then is losing sales or losing income, and they must cut production and lay off workers. Cutting production at the state means less classes at universities in K through 12, less health programs for the poor, less prison space. Laid off workers will include teachers, correction officers, state patrol people, social workers. Just as layoffs at Fujitsu, which was announced in November, have dampening impacts in the Oregon economy, so will the layoffs at the state and local levels have a dampening impact. So I hope this recessionary period allows us to revisit the argument for a rainy day fund and an overhaul process by which we calculate the kicker. We can keep the concept of a kicker, but not how it's presently implemented. And the revenue forecast that comes out of my office should not be the sole driver of the size of state government. That's a debate that should be taken up by the legislators and the governor, and that's as far as I'll go down that road. So, that's the picture today, in a nutshell, of what we see for the Oregon economy. It's in recession, and we really haven't seen this kind of recession in really 20 years. That's the picture today. What will the recovery look like? When will it happen? And as John said, this is what's keeping most economies busy right now, and which is expanding our waistlines at luncheons like this. But let me first say that economic forecast is both a science and an art. The economist weaves an intricate thread of equations crafted by a subjective hand to produce an objective set of results. Your best guess comes with 4 decimal places. Well, our crystal ball that we're using is seeing the bottom of this recession occurring in the second quarter of this year. Our growth will be slow also in the second half. We will not see pre-recession levels of employment until we enter sometime into the second quarter of next year. So we project that it's going to be the service and retail sectors that are going to lead the way as continued low interest rates work their way through the economy, and we have federal fiscal packages will also work their way through the Oregon economy. It's sort of like we've got this wonderful environment set. And you can think about maybe as a holiday party, and there are tables that are set with wonderful goodies. We have a table over here that has very, very low gasoline prices, which are great for the economy. Another table has wonderfully low interest rates. Another table shows that inflation is quite low. We have another table that has federal fiscal policy. You can't touch that table yet, by the way. They keep changing it. Sometimes it has a lot more business cuts in it, but then some other people come back in white shirts and they change and they put more job programs in, and they're working on it, but we know that table will be set and we can come to it. What is missing from the party are us. It's the business and consumer confidence that we can get back on to normal lives, that we feel confident and our jobs are secure, and that we come back to normal spending patterns. And that's one of the biggest risks to these forecasts, is that, in my mind, the business and consumer confidence coming back. We've got the environment, the tables are set. We just need the consumer and the businesses to come to the party. So we're looking at service and retail sectors are going to lead the way. We have a stabilizing stock market, we hope, and rising consumer confidence is going to bring us back to normal spending patterns. Manufacturing is going to take a wait-and-see attitude as sales start to climb before they increase employment. Battered profit margins will need to recover before businesses are willing to undertake additional labor costs. So as excess capacity is carved down, businesses will return to investing, even if the start is only to replace depreciated capital goods. Machines do wear out, and in order to produce, they must be replaced, and we will see that investment coming back. In brief, the recession bottoms out in the second quarter of this year, possibly May, maybe even June. It will be a slow recovery. Manufacturing is going to come around later in the year and in early 2003. Now, there's many risks to this forecast, many things that we have to worry about that may not come true. One is that all these forecasts, the ones you're hearing out in the news, the ones that John had talked about, assume that there is no further terrorist attacks. Otherwise, all bets are off. So we have to weather the war on terrorism, possible Middle East unrest and oil supply disruptions, and temporarily, through this year and part of the next, we have to watch the large price hikes in regional natural gas and electricity that we've seen, the October 1 hikes that we've had. But keep in mind, even though we've seen the market prices of electricity and natural gas come down quite dramatically, and that basically that speculative bubble has burst now in those prices, we have some of our public utilities that have been involved in forward contracts at much higher prices than what are existing today, and they've got to cover those costs for a while. But the key there is for a while. If those market prices stay down, I believe they will, as those forward contracts come due, we're going to see these price hikes possibly rolled back. Maybe not to the level we had before we had the speculative bubble occur, but not, I don't think, at the rate we see today. So as we get into 2003, we may also see some relief regionally on natural gas electricity prices, which will be good for the economy. This recession is definitely painful, and it's definitely deeper than the one we had in 1991. But this recession is far milder than the gut-wrenching period of the early 1980s. In fact, it was about that time that I started my fast food economic indicator, which was in 1982. Measurement was a little difficult back then also, because when I drove up to the takeout window in that period of time, nobody was there. That's how bad it was. But this time next year, when you are faced with a don't bother me attitude at a retail outlet or service center, or with a sales clerk that doesn't have a clue, relax, smile, and say to yourself, at least the economy is in good shape. Thank you.
Well, John's introduction was poetic, and Tom's introduction was gastronomic, and my introduction, I hope, will be historic, and more in relating history than the nature of the remarks themselves. As everyone's pointed out, it's really been 2 years, or 20 years, since we've experienced a recession in the metropolitan Portland area. The last national recession hit the U.S. pretty hard, barely grazed Oregon, and missed the metropolitan area altogether. So it's really been about 20 years since speakers at the City Club came and talked to you with such a dour economic forecast for the region. And it's helpful to think about how much has transpired in the last 20 years. In 1982, for example, at the end of our last recession, Frank Ivancy was mayor and Vic Atiyeh was governor. Back then, there was no internet, no Macs, no email, no cell phones, and if you ever saw a mouse indoors, it was crawling across the floor. back then even, there were no minivans, no microbrews, and no cafe lattes. So we have a very different world today. And as shocking as it may seem, back then, no City Club speaker had ever been asked a question by Ray Polanyi. So a recession really is a distant memory for those of us who have been in the Portland metropolitan area the last 2 decades. And maybe it's the memories of that last recession that make the word so fearful and or make us so fearful and make the word so ominous. The recession between 1979 and 1982 was the biggest downturn in the Oregon economy and the Portland economy since the Great Depression of the 1930s. During that downturn, we lost about 37,000 jobs, about 6% of all our employment. We endured 3 years of negative economic growth, and our per capita income in real terms went down. So the critical question is, will this recession be anything like that horrible one that we remember? And to frame the answer to that question, I'm going to cover 3 major points. First of all, I want to describe to you what I mean by the metropolitan Portland economy. Second, I want to explore in a little bit of detail how that metropolitan economy has performed, particularly in the last decade, so you'll understand what's going to happen to it in the years ahead, and then offer some thoughts about how the recession will turn out. First of all, what do we mean by the metropolitan Portland economy? Well, with colleagues at Portland State University, we've been studying the metropolitan Portland economy, which we define as the 6-county metropolitan area. It's the Tri-Counties, Clark County across the river in Washington, and Columbia and Yamhill counties. That economic unit is a majority, or equal to a majority, of the Oregon economy. More than half of all the economic activity in the state is in the Portland area. There are more than 1 million people at work in that economy, more than 50,000 businesses with a payroll, and a gross domestic product of about $60 billion, which makes Portland about equal to the Czech Republic in terms of an economy. More important, though, than those numbers is understanding what makes that economy tick. And Portland's economy, like all metropolitan economies in the United States, has its own distinctive strengths and specializations. And we focus on what we call industry clusters, groups of businesses in similar and related industries. And Portland's economy is driven by a series of industry clusters, most importantly high technology, but also metals, machinery, transportation equipment, creative services, nursery products, sporting goods and apparel, and a few other key industry clusters. And it's the success of businesses in those clusters that drive our regional economy. So when you think about this regional economy, just don't think about those aggregates. Think about the things that we specialize in the Portland metropolitan area, because that's what drives our economy. And how has our economy performed during the last decade, during the decade of the 1990s? Well, the overall metrics are tremendous. In the decade of the 1990s, the Portland metropolitan area added nearly 250,000 jobs. During the mid-1990s, we had an average growth rate of employment of more than 4% a year, although that has slowed somewhat in the end of the 1990s to about 1.5%, and actually had rebounded in the year 2000. But more important than a fast-growing economy, and that's a very impressive record of performance, by the way, we are a fundamentally different economy than we were 20 years ago. It used to be, when I worked with the legislature in the 1980s, that we described Oregon as a colonial economy. We exported raw materials and we imported finished goods. That is no longer the case. Oregon exports over $11 billion a year. More than 60% of that is high technology electronic products and related machinery. We have very high paid jobs in the high-tech industry, with average wages of over $60,000 a year. And it's more than a manufacturing industry. It's a knowledge-creating industry. What drives high technology in the Portland metropolitan area is not just the manufacturing, it's coming up with the new ideas for the new products. And Oregon high-tech companies spend over $1 billion a year on research and development. Not many people know this, but Intel gets more patents for the work that it does in Oregon than for all of its other United States research combined. Every Pentium 4 chip made in the world was made in Hillsboro at the Rondler Acres facility, which is Intel's advanced prototyping facility for production. And it's more than just Intel. We have a rich array of semiconductor, display technology, and capital goods firms in the electronics industry that are very much at the cutting edge of what they do. And all of that is undergirded in the Portland metropolitan area by the high level of education of our population. More than a third of the adult population of the metropolitan area has a 4-year degree, making this metropolitan area one of the best educated metropolitan areas in the United States. And that explains why we had such a phenomenal record of economic development in the 1990s. The strength of our industry clusters, building a knowledge-based economy. Well, obviously in the last year, it looks like the wheels have come off. Oregon now has the highest unemployment rate in the nation. Our growth rate has slowed precipitously. What did we do wrong? Well, the short answer is we didn't do anything. The fundamentals in the economy have changed. And John and Tom have outlined them, but let me just highlight a couple of the key changes that occurred. First of all, the decade of the 1990s was a phenomenal cycle in business investment. Business investment was growing at a double-digit rate through most of the 1990s. And that investment boom really benefited Oregon industries, particularly the high-tech industry. Since, in the last 12 months, that double-digit rate in business investment has turned into a negative double-digit rate. So that's essentially taken away a lot of the momentum that was driving the Oregon economy. On top of that, in the Oregon economy and in Portland, we are proportionately more dependent on durable goods, capital goods manufacturing, high technology and machinery, metals, transportation equipment. We outperformed the nation in all of those categories in the 1990s, and we have underperformed the nation in the metals side in the last year. But over the last 12-month period, in high technology, in computers, in instruments, in software, and in semiconductors, we have outperformed the nation as a whole. So it isn't a local weakness in our economy, it's an aggregate weakness in that sector of the economy nationally. And our decline has been accentuated slightly by what technically economists would call the accelerator effect, but you would think of as momentum. That is, our economy started slowing in 1988 and 1999. We slowed down from growing at 3.5% or 4% a year to about 1% to 2% a year. We were accelerating slightly to a growth rate of about 2% in the metropolitan area in the year 2000. We were growing more slowly, and therefore we were more vulnerable to the slowdown. And that shows up in a number of sectors that are accelerator sectors in the economy, particularly construction. Construction nationally in the last 12 months has been up about 2.5%. It's been down 7% in the Portland metropolitan area. So the fault is not in ourselves, it's in our stars. So in conclusion, let me just offer three points that I think we should all be aware of. First, recessions happen. We have somehow developed the belief that may have betrayed stock market analysts who are, say, only 25 years old, that downturns actually can happen. We should actually be very surprised that we haven't had one sooner. Second key point is that recessions are temporary. And actually, this looks like it will be a fairly short, fairly mild recession, as has been pointed out, probably bottoming out in the second quarter and turning around in the second half of the year. And third and finally, and I can't emphasize this too much, recessions are not moral judgments. The economy is not a Greek tragedy where some deep character flaw in what we are or what we have done has caused the economic gods to punish us. Instead, we need to take a longer-term view and understand what is good about what this area is doing and how successful we've been, and think about how we get out of the recession and what we do as it does end. And the three critical things I would emphasize are the kinds of investments that we make in education at all levels are the thing that prepare us for this increasingly knowledge-based economy. Second, encouraging businesses and individuals to pursue the development of new ideas, new products, through venture capital, through research and development, through entrepreneurship. Those are critical. And also preserving our quality of life, because that helps attract and retain smart people in the Portland metropolitan area. And well, I don't try and weave intricate threads in my economic model. I want to leave you, after all of this barrage of statistics, with a very simple economic model that you can take with you. It's not as sophisticated as Tom's economic model, but you may find it more useful. It's what I call the whitewater economic model. I don't go to fast food joints as much as Tom does. What I want you to think of is it's the middle of July and you're on a float trip on a raft down the Deschutes River. and you've been through 18 miles of absolutely just idyllic scenery and barely a riffle. And you've just been laying in the sun and maybe having a few beers and having a good time, and suddenly you find yourself in the middle of a raging rapid. Well, that's the kind of recession that we're in. No amount of paddling at this point is going to get you out of that rapid. What you have to do is hang on, get ready to pull back into the boat the people who fall out, and set a good line for the next set of rapids. And that's what we need to be doing as a state, thinking about a knowledge-based economy in the future and how we prepare for it, and not to get too panicky about the rapids that we're in now, because frankly, they're not going to be that bad. So with that, I'll turn it back to our moderator, and thank you very much.
Recessions may not be moral judgments, but coupled with dramatic international events, might they raise important moral questions? So I am interested in what each of you would name as the key ethical questions that should be at the center of our national and state discourse regarding economic, government, and corporate policies that will impact the division between rich and poor and the rise of terrorism, both at home and around the world. And a subset of that question is, did the mantra growth at home at any cost collapse such that we must, in September, such that we must now think about economic policy and practices at all levels within a more international and ethical framework? Good luck.
You want to take the first Nobel Prize?
Yeah. I think I understand the question. I mean, I would argue that if the objective is sort of raising incomes, standards of living around the world, that globalization's the way to do it, continue to reduce trade barriers. We may have gotten a good start to that at the Doha meetings in Cortright, that they're going to sort of open discussions for the next round. The argument being that if you look at history, nations that have participated in the world trading system, you've seen increases in their level of income, reductions in poverty, and I think that's the way to go. Those nations that have been cut off have tended not to do well. And if you're worried about the environment, you've got to get incomes up. Cleanliness is next to affluence.
Well, really, I don't have too much more to add to what John said. I really think the globalization that's occurring, the more that it's pushed, I think the freer trade that we have will lift incomes throughout the world, and that causes us to be more interconnected, and that forces us to care more about each other. Also, in terms of environmental costs, we sort of, depending on what side of the fence you sit on, they're either an environmental cost or an environmental benefit. We have to recognize as a society, if we want to undertake environmental protections, we have to figure out who pays for them and at what price we're willing to pay. And that needs to be an open debate, and that needs to not be something that's pushed to the future sometime, hoping that it just simply goes away.
Yeah, I think in a recession in particular, and I'll focus locally rather than globally, it's imperative that we think about those people who have been thrown out of the boat, because they are essentially the foot soldiers in this particular recession. And I think it's our obligation as a society, when we do tolerate levels of unemployment that produce cordiality in the retail trade, that we also recognize that those people are the ones who are suffering the brunt of the recession. And it's I think it's a moral obligation in an effective economy to take care of those folks.
Arnold, pardon me, Arnold Kogan, member of the club. I'm going to try to keep this question as nonpartisan or bipartisan as possible. But I wanted to ask that the original intent of the Bush administration's tax cut was to return a rather large surplus to the people, mostly wealthy people, but, sorry. Bipartisan. Now, the prior and current proposals to continue the tax cuts are touted to be part of an economic stimulus program. So what's your judgment regarding the real impact of these tax cuts on the economy?
What time frame are we talking about here?
How about in the next 3 to 6 months? Because the economic stimulus package was touted as just that, as a program to stimulate the economy. But maybe you could tell
Well,
me.
you haven't had the economic stimulus package
No,
yet.
all right, right.
I mean, in the
realize-
sense, the thing that's formally described as an economic stimulus package isn't there yet. And we don't really know what it's going to look like. I mean, you've got a couple of visions of what that might look like, and it may well not happen, which may not be a bad thing, because the stimulus package may come, if we're right, that we're talking about this thing ending in the first half of the year, you may get the stimulus package making it through the legislative process after the recession ended, which has been the history of such things. The actions that you had taken last spring, which were not billed as a stimulus package, okay, have had the sort of side effect of kicking in at a time that the economy was weak and functioning as somewhat of a stimulus package. It wasn't very big, okay, in the context of a $10 trillion economy. But I think you've had the serendipity or the happy coincidence of fiscal policy becoming more expansionary at a time of weakness.
Thank you.
Hi, Jane C's City Club member. My question is about what, if anything, the legislature can be done. I mean, it sounds like if we had a lot of federal defense spending, we'd be able to sell lots of computers and mechanical things and trucks, and maybe even sporting goods people would make uniforms, and it would be helpful to the Portland economy. But back in the olden days, we talked about surtaxes, income tax surtaxes. I don't know that helps. I guess I would just like to ask you, what kind of a list might you have for a legislative session to do? And I would really appreciate it if you could give some good productive answers and not just say they ought to go home without doing anything. Thanks.
Okay. First of all, a state is required to balance its budget. And to be able to do something in a very, very short period of time, and like as we were talking that this recession maybe is going to bottom out in midpoint of this year, it's very difficult to get something going at a state level to do something about that. Unlike the federal government, as you said, that can deficit spend, they can do things right away. But at the state level, we have some difficulty of being able to do that. Some of the things that are being tossed around right now, and in fact, the governor has a economic stimulus committee that's going to be meeting in 2 weeks to further discuss things that can be taken place. There's a possibility of speeding up capital expenditures on highways because the capital expenditure is not something that you can in a sense get a bond out there to pay for them, and capital expenditures are not subject to that operating budget that always has to be in balance for the particular fiscal year. That does borrow from the future projects, but if you're talking about a timing aspect, that would be helpful. The other thing I've encouraged is that we talk to our state representatives in Congress, and any federal package that comes out, stimulus package, should try to leave the states what I would call harmless. What I mean by that is there are certain provisions that are being tossed around in the federal fiscal package that would lower the definition of incomes. And since Oregon is tied both on the personal level and the business level to the income definition at the federal level, if you lower the federal definition of incomes, you lower the state definition of income, you lower state taxes, then you have to do something about that, which is either raise taxes or cut programs, and you're being counter-stimulative at the state level. So in that sense, there's maybe something you can do in the meantime. But truly, if anything we can do right now, it's really to set the stage. Just as Joe said, you're looking for those rapids that are coming down the way, and maybe this is an opportunity to prepare better for those times.
Yeah, I was just going to say, the state has basically nothing it can do. We're in the middle of the rapids. By the time you designed and implemented a program, and by the best estimates we've got, the recession's over. And I think that's really the problem at the federal level as well.
One comment, and this is really a regional issue. I mean, we focus here on Oregon. Washington's short about $1.3 billion. Idaho's down about 85 million. And there's a variety of responses that are emerging. Trying to figure out where to make cuts. The Washington governor's proposed expanded or joining the big game to expand their state lottery. They're all. Idaho's dipping into its rainy day fund. There's discussion about tobacco money. Everybody's looking for a way through this short-term problem, but there are not easy answers.
Paul Milius, club member. This is a question specifically for Tom Potiowsky. What would be the impact, short and long term, on the state budget, on the prison population, first of all, and by extension the state budget, if we were not locking up drug offenders?
Well, that is a very difficult question for me to answer. And is that one way of getting out of answering the question? No. Yes, the prison population, because of the stricter rules, has gone up quite dramatically. It's now kind of at a plateaued more level, given that we've worked through Measure 11 effects. And to the extent that we would either relax those guidelines for people going to prison, that would alleviate some of the prison needs of building more prisons and the expense of housing them. So that would alleviate part of the budget. And that's just, I'm just saying that as a logical statement.
Steve Novick, City Club member. I have to take this opportunity to tell Tom Potiowsky that last year he was almost the subject of a vicious personal political attack, because there were some of us who felt that the only way to get Oregon voters to think twice about putting the kicker in the Constitution would be to do these scary ads with grim background music asking the question, who is Tom Potiowsky, and how much constitutional power do we want him to have? My question, which is a little off topic, is actually for Joe Cortright. A few weeks ago, Ron Wyden proposed sending $14 million specifically to rural schools throughout the state and raising the hackles of some Portland public schools and other metro area schools supporters who were worried that Ron might not quite understand that in our school funding formula, perhaps the urban schools are in at least as much trouble as rural schools. I understand, Joe, that you've done some research on a related topic, which is how much money the Portland metropolitan area sends into our school system statewide. And I realize this might be a little off topic today, but I thought it's relatively timely, and I thought you might want to expound on your research.
Thanks. I'll try and rope it into the topic, which is the Portland metropolitan area. The growth in the metropolitan economy is what has driven the state economy in the last decade. And you all remember the dire forecasts of what was going to happen if Measure 5 passed, and they didn't come to pass. The bad things didn't happen because basically the Portland economy performed so well. And we shifted from local property taxes for schools to basically state income taxes. Well, it turns out the Portland metropolitan area pays close to about 55% of all the personal income taxes in the state, but only accounts for about 40% of the state school fund. So as a result, each year, the Portland metropolitan area pays about $250 million in taxes to the state that go to support schools in other parts of the state. And that's based on the equalization formula. So in reality, the health of schools throughout the state, and particularly in the rural areas now, depend on the health of the Portland economy. And as we go into a special session, it's really the slowdown in the metro economy that is causing state budgets to be cut across the board.
This is the point in the program when Dan Goldie would normally get up and ask a very difficult question and really put our panel on the spot. I don't have the wisdom to ask a question of his, but I do have a light-hearted one from the audience, which I know he would enjoy. This week's edition of Newsweek magazine states that economic forecasts have a track record only slightly better than fortune cookies. Should the Mac Club have served fortune cookies today instead of cinnamon rolls?
Is that the end of the questions? Or?
I think so.
Oh, may I go ahead? This is for Joe Cartwright. How much does the health of OHSU have to do with Portland's general economics? It's a big employer. And how much difference does it make if they are expand into North Macadam or Hillsborough for our economy?
Well, the Health Sciences University gets its funding primarily from a couple of different sources. One is the stream of money that's available to pay for health care for Oregon residents, and the other is research money that it brings in. It brings in over $100 million a year. Actually, Portland is pretty typical of medium-sized U.S. metropolitan areas in terms of the volume of research funding that we get. As to the question of whether the development occurs downtown or in Hillsborough, my suspicion is, that it'll be just primarily a localized effect rather than a regional effect. Be the same overall impact on the metropolitan economy, pretty much regardless of where that occurs.
Denise Baumann, City Club member, and I was wondering, for anybody, what you think might be happening in Washington State this next year as far as the economy, and if it's better or worse than Oregon, what impact that might have on Oregon.
Okay, question about Washington. Now, if we look at 2002, I would say all in all, Oregon's going to do better. Washington has not had a downturn since the early 1980s. That was the last recession up there. But you now have that, if you like, that fatal combination in Washington of a national recession combined with a Boeing downturn. If you go back, for example, and look at the early 1990s, you had the national recession, but Boeing was still on the upturn. Boeing turned down long after the national economy. That's not what's happening now. You had the dot-com implosion. If you look at seasonally adjusted Washington employment, it began to decline early in 2001, and then now you have just getting started. Layoffs in aerospace on the order of 20,000. The expectation is that Washington employment in 2002 is likely to decline near 1%. In the Puget Sound area, it's likely to be, according to the Conway-Peterson forecast, about 1.8%. So they're heading into what's going to be the worst part of the cycle for Washington. I suspect Oregon fared worse in 2001, but in 2002, I think the fortunes are going to be somewhat reversed, so we can feel a little better.
I'm Gus Mattersdorf, a member of the City Club. As a former teacher, I need to tell you that while your presentations, I think, were very, very good, they were not A quality. I believe you ducked Arnold Kogan's question about whether it would not be appropriate to pay attention to how our national income is distributed among various classes in the population. From all I read, the poor got relatively, probably absolutely poor. The rich certainly got relatively and absolutely richer. And this may have had an effect that probably impacts the economy. I wondered what you think about that.
Well, I didn't answer Arnold's question when he started, and so I think I got more of an incomplete than not an A. That means a lot because Gus is my former professor. So. But yeah, I agree, and I think the real problem with the tax cut package is not the short-term effect, it's the long-term effect. So much of the cut is backloaded into the later years, and if you look at interest rates, interest rates have come down nicely in the short term, but the long-term rates are not coming down. And what that reflects is the bond terms,